When he is not buying, he is working hard, earning money.
This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Anjali Kamat. Our guests are John Bailey. He is the chief scientist at the Personal Care Products Council, previously 30 years at the FDA. Stacy Malkan is co-founder of Campaign for Safe Cosmetics, author of Not Just a Pretty Face, The Ugly Side of the Beauty Industry. Stacy, your first chapter in your book, Indecent Exposure. What are the chemicals that are getting into us? Can you go through some of the makeup, some of the personal care products we use? What is in them?
Sure. Well, for the book, as I confessed in the book, I actually was a lover of makeup when I was a teenager. I used lots of products, and I was using about 20 products a day. So that was shampoos, lotions, hair gels, all kinds of makeup. And for the book, I went back and I actually looked up all of those products that I had been using as a teen and learned that I had been exposing myself to 230 synthetic chemicals every day, before even getting on the school bus. And that's pretty typical kind of exposures for a teenage girl. So in that mix were 17 carcinogens, chemicals linked to cancer. There were dozens of hormone-disrupting chemicals, many parabens, which can act like estrogen in the body. Lots of these products, as we know from the product tests we've conducted at Campaign for Safe Cosmetics, are contaminated with carcinogens like formaldehyde and 1,4-dioxane that are not listed on the label. We've found those chemicals in dozens of top-selling children's bath products.
Wait, on that issue, wait, just one second. For example, you said dioxane in baby soap. What do you mean it's not listed on the label? What is listed and what isn't?
Well, there are two huge loopholes in labeling laws. The companies don't have to tell us what's in fragrance, and that can be a dozen or more chemicals that are in any shampoo or conditioner with a fragrance, for example. They also don't have to tell us about contaminants or byproducts, and those are some common ones that typically get into products from the chemical processes that are used. So formaldehyde, 1,4-dioxane would be examples, nitrosamines, those are carcinogens. We find lead in lipstick. We've done tests of kids' face paint and found low levels of lead as well as other heavy metals like nickel and chromium. So contaminants are very common. The industry knows about them. FDA knows about them. But there are no limits, and the only way to find out if your product contains them is to send it to a lab and spend a couple of $100s to test it. So the problem with cosmetics, as I was saying about my own daily exposures, it's the mixture of low levels of hazardous chemicals that we're exposed to continually, day after day after day. And the companies always say, and I'm sure John will say, it's just low levels, it's just a little bit, just traces of 1,4-dioxane and formaldehyde. But these are chemicals derived from oil products with known toxicities, and they're mixed together. So a typical baby in a tub could be exposed to formaldehyde and 1,4-dioxane from the shampoo, the bubble bath, the body wash. The same chemicals are used in laundry detergent, dish soap. So the exposures are continual, and there's no need for it. There's absolutely no reason on earth for baby shampoos to contain carcinogens. The companies already know how to make products without those chemicals, and that's what they should be doing.
John Bailey, what's your response? Why won't the industry ban these ingredients?
Well, first I'd like to say that the legislation that we've proposed will, in fact, require FDA to examine and set quantitative levels for materials such as lead and 1,4-dioxane. But it's also important to note that these are not new issues. They've been around for years. They've been thoroughly assessed with regard to safety and exposure. The FDA has many times analyzed products in the marketplace. Most recently, they published a very comprehensive and thorough analysis of lead in lipstick and concluded that the levels being reported do not present a health risk. And this is consistent with what happens in other parts of the world. With 1,4-dioxane, it's the same situation. The levels are very low. The exposures have been assessed and determined not to be a health risk to children. And the notion of cumulative exposure, I think, is one that needs to be explained a little further, because normal safety assessment by toxicologists will take into account margins of safety that will address issues of cumulative exposure. So this is not really a problem with regard to these trace contaminants. So, I think
John
our legislation will address this in a very public. Yes.
Are there any chemicals you think should be banned?
Well, I think that the levels should be set and controlled so that everyone knows what is safe and what levels the suppliers and product manufacturers should test to make sure that they are controlled. The same thing goes with parabens, which Stacy also mentioned. These are very, very important ingredients that prevent the growth of microorganisms, and microorganisms can seriously injure you. So these are important. So when you talk about taking these out, you really need to think about the consequences. So we're also proposing that these materials be assessed and conditions of safe use established. So I think to get to your question, we know what materials are unsafe. They are not used in products. This has been known for a long time, and the industry practices help to ensure that consumers are protected.
Let me ask Stacy Malkan, this issue of lead in lipstick, this is pretty straightforward. Women apply lipstick throughout the day. They're both licking it off, actually ingesting it with their tongues, right? And also it goes into their lips, and they're reapplying and reapplying. How do you know if there's lead in lipstick?
Well, we tested a bunch of lipsticks and found that they contained lead. As John mentioned, FDA did a study. To call it a comprehensive study is a gross misrepresentation. The FDA did no type of safety assessment to determine the safety of lead in lipstick. They took 2 years to analyze lipsticks for lead, and then they reported, yes, guess what? Lipsticks contain lead. Some brands, and they happen to be the most popular brands on the market, L'Oreal, CoverGirl, Revlon, Maybelline, had much higher levels than many other brands. And so, yeah, I think it's a good idea to establish good manufacturing practices and say to those companies, hey, let's figure out how to get rid of this problem, because any amount of lead is dangerous. We know that from the science. And I've heard people like John say, well, lead is a problem mostly for children.
Stacy, why do they put lead in lipstick?
Lead is a contaminant in lipstick. It's either because ingredients that they're using are have lead in them, or it could be part of the pigment or the colorant that companies are using to get certain color quality. And so, as I was saying, lead, it's been said that lead exposure is really just a problem for children, and kids don't wear lipstick. But I think it's really important to point out, where do children come from? They come from the bodies of women. And women, as you said, Amy, millions of women are applying lipstick to their lips every day. And lead is a substance that builds in the body. It stays with us, builds up over time. So any amount of lead exposure is something that you want to avoid. And the Centers for Disease Control even says that consumers should avoid cosmetics that could be contaminated with lead. And we know from our tests that that includes face paints and also lipstick.
Stacy Malkan, John Bailey
and
mentioned...
can't know about this because it's not on the label.
Stacy, John Bailey mentioned the other parts of the world. How does the United States compare to, say, Europe? What are the regulations there on cosmetics?
Well, the United States is much further behind than most other countries, industrialized countries, when it comes to cosmetic safety. Europe has banned about 1,100 chemicals that are known or highly suspected of causing cancer or birth defects, and many other countries have followed suit. Japan has banned formaldehyde. These are chemicals, some of them are still being used in the United States. For example, we find dibutyl phthalate in nail polish, coal tar in dandruff shampoo, lead acetate in men's hair dyes. Those are products you wouldn't find in Europe. And so the U.S. is much further behind. Canada is further ahead. They're setting up a hot list of chemicals that need to be phased out of cosmetics. And those are good steps. And John mentioned that, the industry's recommendations, and I want to say about that it's good to see that the industry is acknowledging that the current regulatory system is inadequate. And yes, we do need to have requirements like companies reporting to